thank you for joining us. We're here because we wanted to reflect a little bit on the last Europeana Cafe that we held a few days ago on the new European Bauhaus and what the role of the cultural heritage sector could be in supporting it. So the cafes are a really informal style of online event that we host. The idea is that they are very low barrier to participation. You can come along and listen to other people speak. You can ask questions, you can share your own opinions, and hopefully learn something or maybe make a new connection along the way. Last week we saw just over 35 people join us from around Europe and I think also around the world. And so actually I'd like to start by asking Mike, as you are here with us right now, what brings you to attend the cafe?
Well, I was very curious about this new European Bauhaus thing and always curious about what Europeana is up to. And so I was hoping I could learn something and get some perspective on this important, fascinating, vague, exciting initiative coming out of the EU. And of course, I wanted to support you and Eleanor and Tamara and all my friends at Europeana in your effort to involve more people in sense-making and decision-making about what the future is going to look like and the role of digital cultural heritage in that. So yeah, and you made it really easy. I just sort of show up and I knew I would be well taken care of.
Thank you. And Maretta, how about you? How did you find the event last week?
Well, Europeana is always the place where I get updated on the bigger picture of development in cultural heritage and what it means to society. And to be honest, I wasn't really aware of this new European Bauhaus agenda, which to me was like a real revelation. One of the participants in the debate said that, you know, he was talking about how growth is destroying our environment. And finally, we see an initiative here from the European Union to try to actually tackle that and calling on culture and the, you know, the pieces that bring together culture like aesthetics and creativity to actually help mend that problem. I thought that was pretty powerful. And I think that Europeana can really hope to play a role here, both with, you know, the big data set we have and all the traditions of more sustainable building culture and aesthetics and equality of quality of living that's embedded there, but also very much thanks to the network of people and all the skills that the network holds.
Eleanor, how about you?
Yeah, I think that for me, so you mentioned that this is this was the second one of the new European Bauhaus cafes that we held. We held one a couple of weeks ago, and I thought there was a little bit of a shift in the conversation, which is good because you want the conversation to evolve. And I think the first cafe was, the question was, you know, what is the new European Bauhaus? And I think in this cafe, when it's like, what could the cultural heritage sector be to the new European Bauhaus? I think there was more talking and less listening. In the first one, I felt like a lot of people were listening. We had a great conversation, very engaging conversation, but a lot of people very active, kind of like in the chat, but not speaking up. Whereas in the second one, people were bringing their voice quite literally, like more vocally to the debate and touching on different aspects of it. And I think for me, one of the things that was key from the beginning was that sense of how the spirit of the new European Bauhaus sat with and matched the kind of like the values and the spirit of the cultural heritage sector. And there was a sense of people recognizing that the cultural heritage sector could and should be a part of that. And then what was interesting for me was to go on and see the ways that people saw those paths into it, or those links, those connections. No, it's a good day.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the kind of consistent referencing back to bringing forward like old traditional skills and the role of the culture heritage sector in doing that. And it reminded me a lot with the first cafe where we talked about the need to work across generations, and how that this also connected with a lot of the discussions around that are happening now around the need to be more inclusive and diverse, and to open our doors more to younger people coming into the cultural heritage sector, but also to use the cultural heritage sector to support the professional development of younger people and new professionals in all sorts of different sectors as well.
One of the things I think that Europeana can support here, and which is already also being featured on the Europeana website, is to target this educationally. And of course, this is work in progress, but it was a big topic that if we want to, see this vision of a more sustainable future happen, we need to build those bridges to our younger generations. And one of the places that's happening is in school.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Marita, because that idea of using cultural heritage in new ways was, I think, quite a big thread in the conversation. That idea of connecting the past, the present, and the future. Because someone had referred to, like, we don't just transfer the knowledge of the past directly to the future. Like, we mold it and we offer new insights and new perspectives. And sometimes that's done through new technologies. And one of the things I thought that was interesting as well was that philosophy of including local knowledge and skills and competencies. That came up as well, and connecting those to today's challenges and how important that was in the discussion around sustainability and the environment.
And Michael, I think it was you who mentioned the term long distance locals.
Yeah.
And I liked that. That really resonated both in terms of what Europe is made up of, what the world is made up of, and also what the Europeana network is built on. Because of course, the digital environment that we all move around in can feel fuzzy, but it's also a powerful thing that connects us with, like us, the four of us. We stay connected this way. We stay in dialogue with each other. And through this, conversation, we're in dialogue with lots of people all over the place. People we know, people we don't know yet, future friends and colleagues, partners in crime. I mean, I think the hybrid form of our local material reality and what we can do there with our hands together, merged with the potentials of digital technologies. I think that has something going for it.
Well, I was encouraged to see the EU president explicitly evoke global as one of the pillars of the project. This isn't just about Europe, but it's about the rest of the world as well. And I think it's one of the big questions in the Europeana's own strategy and the strategy and thinking of all of your member organizations and all cultural organizations, is this how to use the capabilities of digital to really accomplish the potential of global culture. And that's an unwritten story now, and maybe to me is one of the most challenging and important aspects of this for digital cultural heritage. I have some ideas on it, but the question is how to make this truly global in a way that benefits both sides of the equation.
I like what you said there about it being an unwritten story, Mike, because one of the things that I was looking back at some of my notes from the cafe, and it was that sense of like that when the role of digital came up in the conversation, how it went from being a conversation about data to being something much broader. that sense that we didn't have to be kind of restrictive in how we looked at it. It wasn't necessarily just about content. We had digital as experience, digital as channels and tools, but also digital as a mindset and a community. I think it was Alexandra in the conversation had said, data, yes, but it's also network. And if you look at, for instance, what our own network, I mean, this conversation shouldn't just be all about Europeana, because it should be about the broader sector and pulling them into it. But she pointed to the fact that if you look at in the Europeana network, what they're already looking at on stuff on climate change, she said, that's also a space. The network is also a space that we can be working in. So I think it's having quite an open mind about how we use digital. It's about the innovation, but there is that sense of being global, working with others. You said, Maretta, about like friends we hadn't, friends and colleagues we hadn't kind of like met yet. And I think that is one of the aims of New European Bauhaus. And if we can contribute to that idea of forming these new connections to be able to get to new approaches. So if that's something that can come out of this, I think that would be important and exciting.
And I think also the opportunity to learn along with each other as well. Not everybody is an expert on Bauhaus, and as part of this, we'll be learning a little bit more about that and being inspired by that. And I think that's something that the network will also, well, the network and the sector will carry on doing together, isn't it? Listen, I think we're at the point where also we can look forward to what comes next after this, right? There's one more event we have scheduled. The general kind of topic is to look at how does and can the cultural heritage sector promote collaboration and innovation to support the new European Bauhaus. I'm not going to ask you that question, but I'm curious to know where you want that conversation, where you would like the conversation to go next. Where do you see it? Where do you want it to go?
Like Mike, I'd like this this conversation, of course, to materialize into something tangible, something that we do differently. One thing is, the idea generating phase. The call to action from Ursula von der Leyen, I think, is powerful. It's clear. It's also, we also discussed how it's broad. It's a broad definition of culture. Perhaps it's too broad, or perhaps it's inviting, it's inclusive. I think that's a matter of how you receive it. But of course, the bulk of work is what will we do differently? Mike, I think you always say this. When we look back a year from now, what have we done differently than when we sat down here and had this great conversation about it? And I think that's maybe a good question, actually, to kick off upcoming discussions about this, to get real about what will we use the digitized cultural heritage for in this context? What kind of work can it do? Who do we need to get involved? What do we need to do differently as cultural heritage professionals? What is maybe not interesting to do anymore, and what should we start doing lots more of?
Yeah, I right on, and I think for me, I'm yearning for a few things. I'm yearning for some stories that make these very abstract and idealized goals and principles feel more real. I'm yearning for a very honest conversation about the value proposition of the new European Bauhaus and how that relates to the value proposition of the cultural sector, quote unquote, and really culture writ large. I think in these conversations, everyone uses a lot of shortcuts. And as an American, every time I come to Europe and I hear the word culture evoked, I think 5 different things are meant, none of which are really clearly understood. So what do we really mean? And then I think really for this community, the core question for me is the what of digital? What role, what contribution, what essence is it that the digital world, which is Europeana's, this community's clarion call, what does it have to offer to this vision of the world that we're going to be living in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, really, really purely and hardly, and in a tangible way. Because I think this whole story that's being told about the new European Bauhaus is a story about the world we're going to live the rest of our lives in. And it's I think Marata or evoked this sense of urgency about it. It's time to make some decisions. Transformation of society is the transformation of society. It's going to be a shock, and it's not going to be an environment that rewards small half measures. So I would really love to see some very honest and ongoing conversations and decisions about where the digital world and where digital culture fits into that.
Thank you.
But I've been wanting that for decades.
Maybe this is your time. Or maybe this is our time.
Okay.
I think it is. I think it is.
It's funny that you should say that, Mike, because alongside New European Bauhaus, what the European Union is describing the next 10 years as the digital decade. That's the phrase that is now kind of like coming up. It's the digital decade. So if we have the new European Bauhaus as part of the digital decade, like how do we bring them together? And what I thought was really interesting was that question about, like in a year's time, like, what did we do differently? And I think the key word there is like do. What did we do? And Mike, you mentioned kind of like the need for some concrete examples of like what that could be. And I think that's really important. And I know I made this point earlier on, but there are already examples out there of cultural heritage institutions using their physical spaces to establish their place in a community. So I think that examples of that need to be shared. And we need to also look at what those examples of digital are and could be alongside perhaps some of the more traditional or the more expected answers to that question. But I would love in a year's time to be able to say what we did from now to actually make sure that like cultural heritage was not just like a facilitator of this discussion, but a co-creator of that future that you were talking about, Mike. So for me, it would be please do, please share, please decide, please connect with others. That's where I'd like it to go. Not that we want much.
Eleanor, there's an upcoming deadline where people can share some examples, is that right?
There is. It's now the end of June. I think there previously hadn't been a deadline. It had been spoken of as the end of summer. And I think now they've decided that the end of summer, for the purposes of this co-design phase of New European Bauhaus, where people can proactively share inspiring examples, is the end of June.
Yeah. And I think we'll carry on sharing these kind of opportunities and links to where you can find out more information on our social media. So through Twitter and LinkedIn and on Europeana Pro. Actually, just having listened to you speak, and Marita, you were talking about the prospect of working more with education. I think that in our next conversations, I'd like to see more educators be part of that conversation, but actually also more new professionals as well. I know that last week, the European Association for Students of Cultural Heritage and Europe and Austria held a joint event where there was a new European Bauhaus cafe. So I know that they're interested in joining the conversation. So I think I hope to hear their perspectives also in the next event as well.
Susan made a great point in our cafe last week that when we talk about how important crafts are, maybe one of the things that Europeana can do is also help raise the digital literacy skills in an educational perspective. because this is really a craft in the 21st century, you can say, to understand how all this digitality is shaping our lives, our everyday lives, our future, etc. Coming back to the, the ask for what kind of a world do we want to live in an age, diffused with digitality. I just thought it was so apt when I heard the director of the design school here in Denmark say that today all design students, they design digitally. Everything is happening digitally. But before they can do that, they need to learn the craft by hand. And the ability to understand how digital is mediation of crafts that we have been building for centuries, and how we can maybe speed up processes, maybe engage more people, network more through those technologies, but still keep it tied with the local handcraft. That will also, coming back to Bauhaus, help us, build sustainable places and spaces for ourselves.
Julia, there was just one thing you mentioned about our previous or other conversations on this subject and those perspectives. And I thought, well, one of the things that I enjoyed about the cafe was that people were making reference to other similar seminars, conferences and events that they'd be in, and bringing those perspectives to the conversation. And that's a really interesting thing to see. It's a really interesting thing that's evolving around this. And I really hope that in the next cafe, we have more of that, because New European Bauhaus really shouldn't be just about talking to ourselves. We need to be looking outward and making those connections that we spoke about, and joining up the dots and thinking as well. So I'm hoping in the next cafe we can have more of that.
Yeah, and I think not just also in the cafe, but beyond that as well. I mean, you make the point that we're joining the conversations around us, and that we need to go beyond the just speaking with ourselves. And so we're also going to look at how can we support making these conversations more frequent, more open, more widely known. So we'll carry on this conversation in the next cafe. I think there's so much to talk about. I know in the last cafe we didn't get to all the questions we wanted to. It just heated up so much, and I think we could carry on talking for quite a while longer. But listen, I'd just like to say thank you very much for joining us to think back on what we drew from that last cafe event, and invite you to also join us for our next cafe on the 23rd of June. Thank you very much.